Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation. My name is Jason James. I'm feeling particular pressure to stand up straight this evening because we've got a very unusual topic which I know absolutely nothing about. So I'm hoping to learn a lot today, and that is tango in Japan. And why do Japanese people love tango? And I didn't even know that they did love tango, really. Although I have seen the film Shall We Dance, which I suppose is linked to this topic. Anyway, we're not going to learn about it from me, so let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Yuiko Asaba. She is a lecturer in music at SOAS, University of London, and she has just, literally in the last few days, is that right, published this book, Tango in Japan. She is herself, well, I think more of a tango violinist than a tango dancer, although I'm sure she can do both, but she's got her violin with her, and I think we're going to be hearing a bit of violin playing as well as speaking this evening. And she continues to work on tango-related research. It looks like the next book is about Japanese tango performers in China, which seems an even more abstruse. And so, anyway, in a couple of years we can have a talk about that. Anyway, I'll leave it to that in terms of my introduction. So, Dr. Yuiko Asaba, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you to the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation for kindly hosting a book launch event for my book, Tango in Japan, Cosmopolitanism Beyond the West. To briefly introduce my background, I am a music scholar with a specific focus on looking at Latin American music in East Asia, currently specializing in Argentine tango. I am also trained as a tango violinist in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I performed as a tango musician for many years, after having been educated as a violinist in Japan, and I moved to the UK at the age of when I was 13 years old. And my aunt in Japan is an important figure as a tango violinist in Japan. And before I left for the UK as a child, I grew up surrounded by tango in Japan. This background became a fundamental, embodied knowledge before I embarked on my research on tango in Japan. So let us briefly look at the historical overview of tango in Japan. So just to briefly introduce tango in Argentina itself, around 1870 was sort of the beginnings of tango as a genre in Buenos Aires, in La Boca area of Buenos Aires. It quickly spread to internationally and arrived in Japan in 1914. Japan first tango performances in Yokohama and Tokyo happened in 1914. Between 1946, late 1970s is called the so-called Japan's golden era of tango. Where many sort of post-war tango stars were born and very, very active. I also toured to Argentina as well as to Europe, America from Japan as a tango musicians from Japan. And then from 1980s onwards, many new tango groups continued to emerge in Japan. So I introduced many young tango musicians in Japan as well. For example, Hayakawa Jun here performing in Tokyo in 2022. Formidable bandoneonist, young bandoneonist. Also Kawanami Yukie. She's very creative with her new tango outputs. Also a bandoneon player. Why do Japanese people love tango so much? One Argentine musician turned around to ask me this question during a tango orchestra rehearsal in Buenos Aires in 2008. I was living in the bustling capital city of Argentina, Buenos Aires, performing as a violinist with the Orquesta Nacional de Música Argentina, Juan de Dios Filiberto. This question was often asked to me by this colleague, actually, pictured on the PowerPoint here. The picture is from the time I toured with this tango orchestra at the Festival Nacional del Tango de la Falda in the province of Córdoba in Argentina. So this was the orchestra with which I performed, and this colleague used to turn around and ask me these questions about tango in Japan. As I conducted fieldwork while living as a tango musician in Buenos Aires for over 5 years, my background as a Japanese individual inspired many friends and colleagues in Buenos Aires to ask me questions similar to the above. Why tango in Japan? These questions were often followed by personal anecdotes from tango concert tours that they had undertaken across Japan, or stories they had heard about concerts given by Japanese tango musicians in Argentina. Such stories about tango in Japan during my fieldwork, together with my embodied experiences of working as a tango violinist in Argentina and in Japan, revealed to me the significance of tango in Japan, embedded in the Trans-Pacific Japan-Argentina connections that have bypassed the Euro-American West, dating back from the early 20th century to the present day. This research on the transoceanic musical connections between Japan and Argentina eventually became my book. So to briefly touch on the idea of cosmopolitanism that is in the title of my book, my idea of cosmopolitanism in this work is that it embodies the multiple layers of tension in aspiring to belong to the world. It illuminates the constant processes that go in between attraction and rejection, the multiple aspects of inclusion and exclusion in these processes. In my book, I show this tension of cosmopolitan endeavors outside of the Euro-American West. To briefly introduce you to the contents of my book, so Tango in Japan, I start with the preface, why tango in Japan, really unpacking my background as well as a tango musician, also having been grown up in, surrounded by tango until the age of 13 in Japan. So how does that, impact my positionality in the research, etc. That sort of thing addressed in the preface. Also, in the introduction, I unpack the notion of cosmopolitanism that I employ in this book, and also the history of the Japan-Argentina connection. The first chapter is titled Authenticating Tango in Japan. The second chapter deals with regulating and also fashioning the body through tango, so looking at the dresses that the tango performers wear in Japan. Third chapter looks at knowledge, patronage, and Japanese tango fandom. The fourth chapter, performing emotion and the idea of middle culture in post-World War II Japan in the sort of highbrow, middlebrow, lowbrow, that sort of ways of measuring cultures. And the fifth chapter looking at the institutionalization of tango in Japan. And in conclusion, looking at tango and cosmopolitanism in Japan as concluding thoughts. For today, I look at, so in today's talk, I will highlight 3 moments out of such cosmopolitan endeavors that I discuss in my book. First, the history of the Japan-Argentina nexus in the early 20th century. Second, aspects of regulating tango's dancing bodies in Japan. And third, performing emotion through tango. Argentine tango has been internationally popular since the start of the 20th century. In Japan, tango was introduced from the Euro-American social dance circles as a modern practice during Japan's so-called modernization in the 1910s, attracting curiosities and interests from across the Japanese society. Despite tango's initial introduction via Europe and North America, however, Japanese musicians and dance aficionados quickly turned to Argentina in search of tango's so-called origin from as early as the 1920s. In Japan today, Argentine tango is widely performed in concert venues, tango milonga parties, tango dance events, and expensive bars and restaurants that are dedicated only to offering tango music played by live bands every night. Tango is popular among the younger generations of Japanese people, as seen, for example, by the thriving tango orchestra, Orquesta de Tango Waseda, at Waseda University in Tokyo, a student-led professional tango orchestra that performs in major concert venues and at dinner shows. Today, there are around 20 professional tango ensembles and over 50 tango fan associations across Japan. And I analyzed the constructions of Japanese tango scenes in chapter 5 of my book. So at this moment, let us now watch a performance of tango in Japan, performed by Japanese tango dancers, Ryo and Hazuki, the dancers who are featured on the cover of my book, and tango ensemble Asoriko in Japan, who's also featured on the book cover. Okay, so this performance featured Liber Tango, an iconic tango piece by the legendary Astor Piazzolla. I'm sure you've heard of Astor Piazzolla before. So at this point, I would like to talk about tango in Japan as integral to the early histories of modernization of Japan. Critical to note is that in Japan's historical processes of internationalization in the early 20th century, tango came to be perceived by Japanese dance aficionados and musicians as a modern, new vehicle of expression. Japanese historical embrace of the modern, therefore, also looked beyond the West. While writings on Latin America had appeared earlier in Edo and Meiji geographical studies, Japan's interest in Latin America proliferated in the Taisho period from around 1912. Amid these rising interest and imagination surrounding Latin America in Japan, on February 3rd, 1898, Japan and Argentina concluded the Treaty of Friendship, Commerce and Navigation, Nichiya Shuko Tsushou Kokai Joyaku, establishing a diplomatic relation between the two countries. At this time, Argentina and Japan were involved in modernizing efforts to establish unwavering positions in the international communities. The Japan-Argentina connection was intertwined with each other's modernizing horizons from the start, and key historical events to remember here involving the mass Japanese migration to Latin America. Japanese emigration to Latin America from the late 19th century was motivated by Japan's entry into takushoku colonial politics and the Japanese government's attempts to tackle increasing rural poverty in turn-of-the-century Japan. The Japanese state politically encouraged Japanese rural farmers to cultivate foreign lands and to export their products back to Japan. In particular, the so-called ABC countries, namely Argentina, Brazil, Chile, were Japan's target interests. A significant amount of financial data on the ABC countries was collected as a result of this interest. Extensive studies on Latin America in Japanese governmental writings began to appear, and exoticized images of Latin America in Japanese popular press followed, playing key roles in creating the Japanese imagination surrounding Latin America. Precisely around this time, tango-like dances in silent films, such as The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, released in Japan in 1922, and Blood and Sand, released in Japan 1923, both featuring Rudolph Valentino, sonically and visually shaped early 20th century Japanese imaginations of Argentina and Argentine masculinity. Just prior to the releases of these films in Japan, tango dance arrived in Japan in the 1910s via the Euro-American social dance networks. An article appeared on the 14th of August 1913 in the morning edition of the Tokyo Asahi Shimbun newspaper. The report, titled "The Euro-American Scandalous New Dance Tours the Collapse of Public Order," stated that the new dances, which included tango, were, open quote, tormenting the European and North American fashionable circles, end quote. The Japanese article then concluded, open quote, "It is not mistaken to say that tango will cause public moral corruption in our Japanese society," end quote. So the photo on the PowerPoint here, titled "Scandalous Dance in the West," one of the sexual dances, the dance of tango, portrayed North American dancers Florence Walton and Maurice Mouvet dancing the tango as an accompanying feature of the article that was published just a few days before. Despite discourses in Japan surrounding the corrupting nature of such dance, tango arrived in Japan the following year, in 1914, for a diplomatic gathering, thereafter causing a sensation across the Japanese society. One of the first performances of tango was given by dancers Mrs. Weldon, known to be an eminent tango dancer in the United States, and her son at a ball held in the Grand Hotel in Yokohama on the 5th of May 1914. Their performance was demonstrated to 60 foreign guests, with a few Japanese officials present. The following comment by the American dancer herself, quoted in this Japanese article, caught my particular attention. "Tango dance is not vulgar. When it is danced by an elegant person, it becomes elegant. But when someone vulgar dances it, it turns into a vulgar dance." End quote. So through the use of the dichotomy, the elegant vulgar binary here, the class and racial discourses surrounding the reception of tango is observable here. Tango's introduction in Japan signaled one of the first instances in which the two words, elegant and vulgar, directly translate into Japanese eleganto and vulgar, were used publicly, and the arrival of ideas surrounding this dichotomy regarding foreign entertainment and social manners set out by Japanese elites. Through these opposing ideas of elegance and vulgarity, tango in Japan represented a cosmopolitan yet dangerous other, a hugely attractive idea signaling modernity, while at the same time threatening public order. Yet perhaps precisely because of the attraction of these combined ideas of danger and elegance, that tango quickly gained popularity among the wider social classes in Japan from the 1910s, rapidly turning the public's eyes and ears to Argentina in search for tango's origins from the 1920s. For example, one of the key figures who introduced the Argentine style of tango dance to Japan, as opposed to the Euro-American version of tango, was the Japanese kimono shopkeepers Yae and Hyojiro Kato, through their aspiration to study what they called the roots of tango by traveling to Buenos Aires in November 1934. In May 1935, the Katos returned to Japan, bringing back not only tango dance knowledge, but many tango records, preparing the ground for a wide dissemination of this recorded music in Japan through major record companies across Japan, like Victor Records, etc. A figure like Baron Megata Tsunayoshi, for example, is another influential figure who introduced tango that was popular in Paris at this time to the Japanese aristocracy from the late 1920s. Tango dancing and tango music making became immensely popular in venues such as dance halls, cafes, and cabarets across Japan. Yet the elegance vulgar binary surrounding tango in Japan was to be reflected further in the regulation of tango's dancing bodies in Japan. During my field research in Japan in 2014, I encountered intriguing news that as of 2012, tango had become the target of regulation under the law known in Japanese in abbreviated form as the Fueiho law, in English, the Acts on Control and Improvement of Amusement Business. The reenactment of this 1948 law led to arrests of many dance establishment owners in 2012 in Japan and resulted in the subsequent organization of pressure groups and dance support associations in Japan who protested against the application of this law to dance establishments. This movement led to a cluster of these laws that had included regulations on couple dances, including tango, being revised in 2015, leading to the final removal of police regulations regarding tango and couple dances from Japanese law in 2016. So what is the Fueiho law? The Fueiho, in English, the Act on Control and Improvement of Amusement Business, was established in 1948, 3 years after Japan's defeat of World War II, at a congress held by Japanese parliament, prompted by the US occupying authorities during the Allied occupation of Japan, to, open quotes, to control public chaos and moral disorder, end quotes, after the war. The public chaos referred to the sexual violence by the occupying servicemen on the Japanese citizen, and derived in particular by the pressing concerns of the US occupying forces to suppress the spread of venereal disease among the US servicemen who frequented establishments such as the so-called Special Comfort Facility Association that was established across Japan at this time, as well as dance halls, cabarets, where tango was of course danced, and other entertainment establishments such as what was known as so-called special restaurants, all catered for the occupying servicemen. I now return to the 2010s when this law was reenacted to regulate couple dancing, leading to the revisions of this law once again in a contemporary context. The pressure groups and dance support organizations in Japan who protested against this application of the Fueiho law to dance establishments argued that prostitution no longer takes place in dance venues. In 2012, however, the National Police Agency published a part of the text from the official inquiry, along with the agency's response to this process, stating that, open quote, such trades dependent upon circumstances would trigger excessive pleasures between men and women, which will harm a benign and clean moral environment, end quote. As a reaction to tango having become the target of this law, a tango federation was established in Japan to provide nationally approved certificates for tango dancers to teach in Japan. This association not only provides the rights to teach tango, but enables certified individuals to organize milonga dance parties while keeping their dance schools legally protected under the relevant category of the law for regulation of this law. This tango federation continues to exist after tango's removal from police regulations that holds a certain authority among Japanese tango dancers. This defines the institutionalization of tango in contemporary Japan, where an institution of teaching works as a legitimization of tango. Now I move on to aspects of emotion. In Argentina, it is believed that in Argentine tango, a sense of intimacy is created in part through its expression of everyday feelings, and for some, according to anthropologist Julie Taylor, a shared sense of bad luck in life that is perceived to have universal implications. Quite similar aesthetic to enka in Japan, for example. In Japan, this aesthetic of emotion in tango performance has been adapted since the immediate years after World War II. Throughout the history of Argentine tango in Japan, Japanese tango music aficionados and musicians have cultivated a discourse or narratives surrounding tango's associated aesthetics of emotion. These narratives of tango and emotion became further established in Japan in the years immediately after the end of World War II, a time when embracing the idea of modernity once again became the crucial ethos to rebuild Japan after its defeat of the war. Various Argentine tango music associations that were founded across Japan at this time, nurtured this narrative surrounding tango and emotion through discussions in the widespread publications on Argentine tango in Japanese popular presses, and via the Argentine tango music radio programs that were established during this war across Japan. In this popular narrative, being able to convey a powerful emotion came to be considered a key factor in a good tango performance in Japan. These narratives surrounding tango and emotion in post-war Japan also nostalgically look back to before World War II, when tango was popular in Japan in the 1930s. In the 1930s, the well-known Argentine tangos like La Comparsita and Poema became huge hits among the Japanese public. The two tango songs were to be recorded as part of a popular Japanese tango song after the war, reminiscing the pre-war era that has not yet experienced the utter destructions of World War II. The outbreak of World War II led to the closure of dance halls and prohibition of popular entertainments across Japan, including ballroom dancing and other genres imported from the United States, such as jazz, due to the political climate at this time. However, tango, which was considered by the Japanese authorities to be distinct from what they called the music of the enemy countries, continued to warm Japanese people's hearts in private settings, even during the war. So this familiarity with tango, being rooted in Japanese people's everyday lives at this time, before and during the war, became a key incentive for the tango boom, the golden era of tango in Japan that followed the end of the war from the late 1940s to the 1970s. Accordingly, Japan's golden era of tango not only refers to its boom after the war, but also to the era when tango represented comfort and hope at a time of political turbulence and tremendous threat to lives. So some key figures here of Japan's golden era of tango. Fujisawa Ranko, who was dubbed in Argentina to be the tango diva, the diva of tango from Japan, who toured Argentina, but also to Europe, Argentina, performing tango. Sakamoto Masaichi, another prominent bandoneon player here on the left, yes, at the far, that way. Abo Iko, another key figure from the golden era of tango, who toured with Fujisawa Ranko to Buenos Aires many times. Hayakawa Shinpei, who is also a bandoneon player, bandoneon being the star instrument of tango, by the way, and who led Orquesta Típica Tokyo and toured Argentina, across Latin America many times, with his wife, Fujisawa Ranko, as the singer. At this point, my attention turns to the emotionality in the voice of Japanese tango singer, the late Abo Ikuo. Abo Ikuo began singing tango during Japan's golden era of tango and performed right up until his passing in 2021. Abo's iconic position as a celebrated tango singer is evident from the description about his voice that many of his fans called expressive and beautiful, open quote, a voice that directly reaches the audience's heart, end quote. His mastery of Buenos Aires Spanish, considered a critical ability in being able to express tango sentiment, and his ability to adapt tango's emotional aesthetics for a Japanese audience, capturing the hearts of his fans and wider audiences, had made him a star in Japan. I was fortunate to interview Abo Ikuo back in July 2015, and I was of course eager to learn more about the sentiment in his voice at this interview. During what became a 4-hour interview, Abo Ikuo mentioned the word sentimiento, the Spanish word for sentiment, many times, and that even in his first tango vocal lesson back in the early 1950s, his teacher, who was an Argentine bandoneon player who resided in Japan in the 1950s, told him that, open quote, "You have a sentimiento in your voice," end quote. Abo repeated this particular phrase many times during our interview. Each time he repeated this phrase in Japanese, Abo enunciated the Spanish word sentimiento with Spanish pronunciation and as though reciting a tango lyric, creating an elusive feeling while emphasizing the importance of emotion as a key aesthetic of tango performance. With his facial nerve neuralgia, with which he was diagnosed in his early 20s, Abo recalled how he first discovered the pronunciation for the letter J, or jota, the Spanish throat sound that does not exist in Japanese language, through the physical limitation made inevitable by his severe facial paralysis. Abo demonstrated how he pronounces the letter J in Spanish jota, saying jota, with his mouth slightly tilted towards the right, finding the precise position of the airflow in his mouth in order to pronounce it. He said, "If it had not been for my facial paralysis, I would not have met Tango," explaining to me that his illness is what he called one of the life ingredients that created the sentiment in my voice. I will now play a video recording of Abo Ikuo performing the tango classic En esta tarde gris, on this gray afternoon. This was televised in Mexico via Telerismo, which was a broadcasting company in Mexico at this time in 1967. En esta tarde gris. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry, I have to cut that.
What does the name of the song mean?
En esta tarde gris, on this grey afternoon.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so we can talk more about the video clip later during the Q&A. So, entangled with aspects of Euro-American modernity, Argentine tango was first brought to Japan through Western social dancing and quickly created a Japan-Argentina connection as early as the late 1920s. Japanese performers have embraced this foreign genre as a vehicle of new expressivity. Tango devotees in Japan have digested its knowledge, creating and nourishing a distinctly Japanese tango culture. The sounds of tango have provided comfort and a sense of hope to many during the most turbulent years of the 20th century. Over the course of more than a century, this genre has entered the hearts and accompanied the joy and suffering of many Japanese people. In my book, therefore, I have sought to illuminate not only the why of tango in Japan, but also the how, revealing the histories and contemporary dynamics of aspiration, desire, rejection, hope, entangled with racial and class tensions, and the internal regional complexities that continue to shape Japan's tango worlds. Thank you very much. Thank you. So yes, I just made this available on the slide here. So ebooks available it is in US dollars. So just check this out, please. Yes, at this point, just play a sort of very quick tune on my violin. Let me just... Okay, so this piece is called Los Mareados. The mareados, they mean sort of feeling dizzy. So directly translated as sort of the dizzy ones, I suppose. But I think of it sort of like dreamers, or, you know, as I talked about tango and emotion being such an important part of tango aesthetic, I think of it as sort of life, as a dream, as a dream, I suppose.